Okay, thanks for joining me again. This is the fourth video in this series. If you haven't seen the other three videos, I encourage you to go back and watch those because it shows how I built the painting up to this point. Right here, I'm just adding some, it's cadmium red with a lot of titanium white to imply a glow off the sunlight bouncing off of his white fur. And I'm just very carefully blending this here. Now I'm going in with a, it's an imitation badger hair brush made by Rosemary & Company, great brush company. This is their Series 279, I believe. This is a long flat brush. They work very well for delicate soft blending as I'm doing here. Speaking of brushes, at the end of this video, I'm going to be doing a short demonstration on how I hold brushes. How you hold a brush can make a big difference, and the amount of pressure you apply on a brush can make a big difference in how your brush strokes turn out, which is going to make a big difference on how your painting turns out. So stay tuned. At the end of this video, I will be showing this demonstration. And if you have not already subscribed, I encourage you to do so because I'm going to be posting more videos and more mini demonstrations at the end of these videos. So if you subscribe, it's completely free. You can just click the red button below, and that way you won't miss any episodes. Now I'm speeding this up a little bit just to keep it interesting. I'm going in with these mid-level mountains. I'm implying some sunlit areas. And this is basically like a titanium white with some alizarin and crimson and maybe a touch of yellow ochre, though I probably didn't put much of any in there because, as you may know, the principles of aerial perspective, the first color to drop out as things recede is yellow. So the further back you go with sunlit areas, the less yellow you want to have in them, if any at all. And I'll be posting some more videos talking about these principles that can totally make a difference. They can make or break a painting, actually, if you do not know them. If you have questions about them below, or if you have questions, post them below, and I'll be happy to try to answer them in the meantime. Using a palette knife here, these are rocks, just giving myself different textures and everything. Palette knives are great for being able to do that. I'm going over this very gently. I'm not pushing down hard at all. Okay, adding highlights on these distant mountains. Once again, it's very important to keep yellow or any kind of earth tones out of this mixture. This is basically titanium white. I might have a little bit of blue in there and some alizarin crimson to warm it up, but absolutely no yellows, absolutely no warm earth tones. And for these highlights on the mountains, I don't really have anything preconceived. I'm just laying down the paint and seeing how it looks. I'm not going real thick with this paint. That way I can paint over some of it if I want to. And if it doesn't work, I can always scrape it off. Now I'm going with a lighter value here on the shadow side of these distant mountains. That is going to force me to have to go even lighter with the highlighted areas. Remember, it's always about relationships when you're painting. Color relationships, value relationships. You're not trying to capture the exact color of something you see. You're trying to capture the relationships of the colors between them. Once again, just using that palette knife, gives some nice, interesting blending when you use it. Okay, now for some very careful drawing with the mountain goat's horn. I'm going wet on wet for the most part. I'm painting into thick paint, but I got to be very careful about how I do this. Worst case scenario, I have to scrape that section off and repaint it, but if I sneak up on this very carefully, I won't have to do that, hopefully. Now I'm speeding this up. I did not paint it this fast. It was a very slow, somewhat tedious process, but just want to make sure nobody gets bored watching that. Okay, now I'm going in back to normal speed, doing some refinements there. This painting is 11 by 14 inches. In case you're wondering, you might be watching this on a huge screen. And, you know, it looks really big, but it's not a big painting at all. This is a pretty small painting. The or the horn that's further away is picking up a little more sunlight because of the way it's angled. So I'm just adding some warms there, a little bit of yellow ochre, and probably some transparent red oxide with some white. I'm speeding this up. You can see I'm adding that same warmer mixture to that closer mountain. Now this is the highlight for the ear. It kind of blends into the rest of his fur, but just that little bit of paint right there really brings that out. Okay, now I'm going back in with that background color, and I'm just carefully refining that by painting back into it. Now we're down here in the rocks. Just adding some kind of lighter mid-tone areas for some of these rocks. Felt they were a little too dark in some spots, and I'm adding some dark accents. You can see I'm speeding this up here. This is a lot of going back and forth. If it's a little too light, I darken it. A little too dark, I lighten it. Same with warm and cool. You know, I paint a little warmer tones in here, a little cooler tones there. There's really no definite right or wrong way of doing this. Okay, now this is the shadow of the mountain goat. So this dark green is made by a mixture of, there's a lot of different ways you can get there. Viridian with transparent red oxide, some white, maybe some yellow ochre. And keep that in mind, there's, you know, in order to arrive at a color, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Somebody can have a completely different palette than what I have and still be able to mix the same colors that I have. You just have to know how to mix colors. Okay, I'm just refining that shadow now. I thought it was a little too dark. Adding some highlights on the rocks there. Using fairly thick impasto paint, because at this point, what I lay down, I'm very confident that it's the correct color and value. Now, you'll see this in the next video. Those rocks on the lower left-hand side, those will all be scraped out. This stage of the painting is really just a stage of refinement. I'm refining things that were initially blocked in. Now down here, I want to bring that rock down and have it go out of the bottom of the composition. Gives it some implied space. I mess around quite a bit with the composition of the rocks in this. The longer I paint, the more difficulty I have. I shouldn't say difficulty, but the areas that I agonize the most over are the simple areas, the areas of composition. Really, the mountain goat in this is the easiest part. And I say that because there is a definite right or wrong. If his anatomy is off, that's something that's a lot easier to see. And therefore it's easier for me to fix. There's a definite, objective right or wrong, but it's not like that with composition. So there's no right or wrong on whether I have a rock in one spot or another. It just depends on how it looks. And so those are the parts that I agonize the most over these days. I read that the master landscape artist Clyde Aspavig, he painted and repainted and kept scraping and repainting this one bush in the bottom corner of one of his paintings. I don't know if he said like 16 times or something like that before he got it right, or is more. So you can see I'm blocking in this tree here. Kind of experimenting with different things to give this painting more interest. The danger here with this tree is painting it how they look, but trying to make sure it doesn't end up looking like a Christmas tree. Which right now looks like I'm on my way to doing. Going back in with another tree. And this is tricky here because I'm laying paint that's even darker than the layer that's underneath it. And I'm doing it wet on wet. So you have to be very, very gentle in how you hold the brush. And once again, I'm going to demonstrate that a little more clearly at the end of this video. Okay, those are some trees indicated on the mountains back there. Those will need to be adjusted. Basically just giving myself little color indications. Okay, now I'm deciding on a tree behind the mountain goat. I will paint in this tree. I will make it, to give the whole show away here, I'll paint in this tree, I'll make it even bigger, and then I'll end up wiping the whole thing out. You'll see the destruction of this tree in the upcoming video. So once again, subscribe so you can watch this. It's a good lesson on how you make decisions, how you make changes, how you get rid of things that you decide later you don't want. But at this point, of course, I'm narrating this later, but at this point I decided to add this tree to see what it would look like. The reason why I decided not to keep it is because I just didn't like how it was sticking out through his back there. So I'm going in here with really dark paint, and it's kind of blending in with the paint underneath of the mountain colors just a little bit. But I can go back over that somewhat darker paint very gently with a lighter color and kind of blend into it to lighten the value somewhat. It's a lot easier to lighten dark paint than it is to darken light paint when you're working wet on wet, that is. Okay, I'm just doing some blending there, and I want to bring that tree down underneath the mountain goat there at the bottom. Kind of show where it goes into the ground. Like I said though, this is all going to be wiped out in a future video. Probably going to have one more video to post to show the completion of this painting. Like I said, this is video 4. A lot of artists will do the entire painting just sped up, and I might do that in the future. I'm curious to know what you think, if you like the showing the slower, the normal pace of how a painting is done and blocked up in sections, or would you rather see a 1 week painting done in 5 minutes? I personally don't get a lot out of those when I watch them, so I'm trying to do like a nice balance here. But comment below and let me know what you think. Going in with the palette knife, I'm just doing some thin upstrokes of paint there to indicate some branches in that, and I'm refining that and adding some stuff with the brush. But doing a nice painting is not a quick process. The longer I paint, the longer it takes me to paint. It doesn't get faster for me because it really ends up, at the end of the day, it's really about making decisions. It's not like athletics where, if you're like a receiver in a football team, the faster you can run, the better you are. For me, painting is not like that. Like I said, if you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do so. So I'm going to be posting a lot of videos. A lot of what I'm showing you here, you can end up paying a couple $100 a DVD just to learn some of the stuff that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show it to you all for free. So be sure to subscribe. It helps me, supports me, so I can post more videos. And like I said, it's going to help you because I put in countless hours and tons of money traveling, taking workshops, buying DVDs and that to learn all this stuff, and you can learn it all for free. Some of the stuff I'll be showing can be somewhat advanced, so if you're an intermediate painter, I think this can really help you, but I'm also going to post stuff for people who are more at the beginning stages. So no matter what stage you're at, you should be able to get something really good out of these videos. Okay, now on to the tip that I promised you earlier in the video. I'm going to be describing different ways that I hold the paintbrush to get different techniques and to get the paint to behave in certain ways. I'm going to be doing this on a Claessens number 15 canvas. It has kind of a medium roughness. I like the paint on this. I like the texture it gives me. I'll go into more details on the different canvases that are out there and the different looks that they'll give you in another video. For brushes, I'm going to be using Silver Grand Prix brushes. These are bristle brushes, hog bristle brushes. They're flats. You can use a lot of different types of brushes. These I like because I find them very versatile for blending and paint application. Once again, in another video, I'll be describing different brushes that I use, different looks and techniques that they will give you. So if you have not subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe below. It's free. Just click on that red button and then you won't miss any episodes. The first way I hold the brush is like this. You can see I will hold it, with between my thumb and my fingers. I'm not holding it like I'm drawing. I'm holding it like this, and this is for doing heavy scrubbing. I paint on a fairly rough canvas usually, so if I'm going to scrub the paint in really hard to get it into all those little tiny valleys and everything in the texture of the canvas, I'm going to push in pretty hard with my brush. These are bristle brushes. They do tend to get some abuse, but the Grand Prix are really good. So you're going to want to hold it and go like that. You can go like this. I will do this at times, holding it more like a pencil, but I found that this approach helps keep me a little bit looser. I want to say with this approach too, of using a heavy hand in scrubbing this initial layer in, you can thin this layer with mineral spirits. I have not thinned this paint. I tend not to thin my initial layers when I put them in. I'll use a quick dry paint like an alkyd paint. The reason why I don't like to thin it too often is because the mineral spirits will actually cause the drying time to be longer. And when I'm doing these initial underlayers, I actually will put an undercoat on my painting and let that dry and then paint over it. So I want the drying time to usually be as quick as possible. But you can do this with thinning your paint with mineral spirits. It's going to spread a little easier. It's going to get into those valleys and crevices a little more, especially with this heavy-handed application of paint. Okay, next I'm going to go over this layer of paint that I just laid down, which is still very wet, as you can see on my finger there. I'm going to go over that with another layer of paint. This is basically titanium white mixed with cobalt blue. I'm going to do a thin layer on that. Now this is where holding your brush becomes very important, because beginners might have a tendency to go in and really scrub that in there, and that might be called for at times if you really want to mix this top layer into this under layer here. But it's also going to create, as you can see, more of a muddy effect. Now if that's what you're after, because mud is not always a bad thing in paint, if that's what you're after, then go for it. But if you want to lay a clean layer on top, then you're going to want to go over it with a lighter hand. So I'm going to be holding my brush like this, and I'm going to very gently go over that. And you can see that gives me a totally different feel than this. It's keeping this blue light, I'm sorry, clean, but it's also letting some of the undercoat show. If you like to paint looser and get a loose look, this is definitely the way to go. You can see it's just a nice gentle drag. Also, another technique might be to very lightly, go over this. You can see as I'm going over this really fast, I'm holding the brush like this again. I'm going over this very fast, and you can see it's just barely tinting this undercoat that I have here. And that's just with a very light, rapid back and forth motion. It's just going to give you different looks. I want to say with this too, because I'm not going after impasto paint yet, I'm basically just glazing over this undercoat. I don't load my brush up with a whole lot of paint. You can see there, you know, it is fairly well loaded, but there's not like big thick impasto areas there. When you're doing this, if you're doing like a scrumbling technique or a glazing technique, you know, you're going to want to go fairly light with this. Primarily with this one, because it's wet on wet, you're going to want to go light. But even if this layer were dry, if it hasn't cured, and oil paint takes a long time to cure, I can't remember if it's months or years, but if it hasn't cured yet, even if this is dry and you go in and you really scrub it like this, you're going to disturb that layer underneath. And then you're going to end up with, you know, spots of, you know, pure canvas basically. It's probably not the look that you're going to want to have in your painting. So a light hand is always good when you're doing a scrumbling technique. I'm barely touching the canvas with this. Okay, now for the fun part. I scrubbed on here some ultramarine blue and some alizarin crimson. This is basically just to make this dark, to illustrate this. Now I'm going to go in with very thick impasto paint. You could see there that my brush is loaded up with quite a bit of paint, quite a bit more than you saw in the last clip. And how to apply this is going to be, once again, I'm going to be holding my brush like this. It's going to be a very light drag. This paint underneath here is wet. I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm going to do it again down here. It's a very, very light drag. And you can see by doing that, I'm rarely disturbing any of the undercoat onto this. Some people might think, you know, when you're putting impasto on, you stick it on like that. And that might be the effect you want to go for. But what you can see when you do that, I put a lot more pressure there. You can see how it bent the bristles down. You can see how that disturbs quite a bit more of that undercoat there. I'm laying the brush almost flat, like the entire brush. It's almost like I'm laying the whole thing almost flat down on the canvas. I'm keeping it at an angle that's pretty much parallel with the plane of the canvas. And then I just barely touch the canvas and I just drag it. You can see that the hairs of the brush, they're not even bending at all. So what I encourage you to do is take some blank canvas that you have at home and scrub some thin paint on there. Make sure it's still wet. Then next, take some thicker paint and just practice going over it without disturbing the layer underneath. What you're going to want to do is put a stroke down, wipe it, like I'm doing here, and then go over it with another stroke, and just see how lightly you can lay that down without disturbing it. That's going to be good. That's going to give you good practice. And even if you work wet on dry, it's still good to know this impasto technique, because it's not just about not disturbing the layer underneath, it's also about how the paint looks afterwards. And this light touch is going to give you a lot different look than if you're putting it down heavy.